to this podcast of the Centre for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge. I'm Thomas Peake, and today we'll be speaking with Alice Wairimu Nderitu, the new Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide to the UN Secretary General and head of the important United Nations Office on Genocide Prevention and Responsibility to Protect. Before taking on her new role, Special Advisor Nderitu enjoyed a distinguished career in international peacebuilding, a career which includes a significant and important role played in intercommunal reconciliation processes in her home country of Kenya. Welcome, Special Advisor Nderitu.
Thank you very much for having me today. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for taking the time. It's a pleasure. And welcome to your new role. And I hoped we could perhaps begin with hearing what your priorities will be as Special Advisor.
Thank you. I come to this role as, so to speak, straight from the villages where I've been mediating armed conflict, not just in my continent of Africa, but also in other spaces around the world, in the Philippines, in Myanmar, in quite a number of places. And I've been working with communities. I've worked at the national level too, like with the national commissions and other kind, and those other kind of bodies. And I come to this office with the awareness that my predecessors did a huge amount of work to raise awareness, to build the capacity of regional organizations, member states, and national governments on understanding the framework of the prevention of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, what we call atrocity crimes. And I feel I come to this space knowing that the communities that have been working among the farmers and herders in the Sahel, for example, who on every other day atrocities happen amongst them, but they do not recognize these atrocities as related to the kind of atrocity crimes I just mentioned. I feel that I have to create that link for people who are on the ground where atrocities are happening, um, knowing the link and understanding that genocide prevention is not the prerogative of only nations or member states or countries or regional organizations, but it is their own prerogative. So, really, the question that I bring with me to the UN is how do we get people in communities around the world who are involved in situations that could lead to mass atrocities or that are already in and are already atrocities in themselves. How do we get them to recognize what is happening to them and to do something about it? So, the other priority that I have, of course, is to ratify the convention, to get as many more countries as possible to ratify the convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. That I worry that such a basic convention that should be at the core of every country in terms of protecting its people from genocide that hasn't been ratified by quite a number of countries. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is to commission a study on the countries that have not yet ratified the convention so that I understand the reasons behind their lack of ratification and then get clear recommendations from them in terms of what we need to do towards ratification. And then there are countries that have ratified the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide that still continue to have atrocities happening, yet they've ratified this convention. So I'm also going to work to see the extent to which they've incorporated the convention into their domestic legal systems and also how they interpret the obligations under this convention and also any other international treaties on the prevention of atrocity crimes. And then I also come to this space with a strong passion for teachers. I worked with teachers a lot. All the the conflicts I've mediated, I've involved teachers because teachers have a lot of authority in communities. People ask them questions like, for example, where do I open a bank account? Like, who do I vote for? And it's so important then to develop programs for teachers on the prevention of atrocities and prevention of genocide, um, to teach what hate is and what are its roots, what constitutes hate speech, which is very, very core to my mandate, how to combat hate, how to recognize conflict triggers, how and basic negotiation and mediation skills that every child should have growing up. That right now are taught as something like, for example, taught to communities in conflict, but taught to people to solve problems, not taught to children to grow up with knowing that if there is ever a conflict, that this is what they need to do. So then, of course, I'm carrying on the work of my predecessors, key among which is hate speech, work on hate speech. Our office is the focal point for the UN strategy and plan of action on hate speech. And I plan to continue stepping up action to address this global challenge in collaboration with government, civil society, private sector, and other partners. But ultimately, when by the time I leave this office, I I I I come to this office knowing that there are so many people in the world who know that atrocities are going to happen to them and they do not know who to tell. And I would really like to be the in that space that creates that connection of when an atrocity is about to happen and who to tell. And I say so knowing that quite a number of countries don't have, for example, 911. I'm in a country right now where sirens keep going on, and each time I hear a siren, then I know that that's a response, that somebody somewhere has asked for help, or help is being taken somewhere. And I think to myself of the number of places I've worked in where that's a reality that they would never imagine, where whatever is happening to you happens to you. You know that killings are going to happen, and you feel completely helpless. Sometimes the government is too far away from you. And ultimately, what is it that people like me, in the kind of position that I have been put in right now, what can I do to ensure that people who know that atrocities are going to happen to them know then who to tell, and that the response is forthcoming, and that the response is impactful and useful?
Thank you. That's a very interesting answer. It sounds very much as if you're kind of melding kind of top down and bottom up approaches to genocide prevention, which must in itself be somewhat of a challenge.
Yes, absolutely. It's a huge challenge, especially because of what I said earlier, that most people in the world, including those who are undergoing atrocities, who are undergoing clearly in a space where things are happening that could amount to genocide, they do not interpret what is happening to them from the perspective of genocide. They feel that genocide is something that national governments deal with, and regional organizations and international bodies. They don't see it from their perspective. And even when they do, they don't know what to do. They do not know who to speak to. They do not know who to write to. They do not know how to stop what is happening to them from happening to them. They do not know how crimes, for example, are certified as genocide. And that then creates that link between top down and bottom up approaches, because there has to be a meeting point between the two. What exists at the national legislative level, regional, international legislative level, and what then exists in terms of linking the atrocities on the ground to those protections that already exist.
Thank you. And turning slightly to the kind of the some of the top down challenges facing your office, I wanted to ask you at the beginning of your tenure, how significant do you see some of the structural challenges that you're faced with, specifically your need to operate within and to encourage cooperation within a Security Council where one permanent member has arrived at a genocide determination on another? How do you navigate that landscape?
I have been undertaking quite a number of courtesy calls since I came into office, and meeting a lot of people from various member states. And one of my key priorities was the Security Council. And I know I've engaged with them, and I know that the council itself consists of member states who, by virtue of just coming from member states, have diverging interests. But at the same time, I know that the UN Charter gives the Security Council the responsibility to, if I may quote, maintain international peace and security. And I also know that to be efficient, my office requires the council to support in diffusing conflicts. So I know that the Security Council, there are many dynamics around the Security Council, but many conflicts have gone on worldwide, even with the existence of the Security Council. Probably what's most instructive for me is that these conflicts haven't drawn the major powers into direct conflict with each other. So, in relation to your question, the primary focus of my mandate is prevention of genocide. So I do not determine whether genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity have occurred, but rather I focus on early prevention on elements that, if not addressed or stopped, might heighten the risk of these crimes. So when one member state accuses another member state of genocide, or when one member state arrives at a genocide determination on another, then we as an office are not in the position to determine whether that is a genocide or not. What we are in a position to do, is to look at specific situations, and we look at risk factors. We look at the past, we look at the present, and we see whether those risk factors, we advise whether those risk factors could legally qualify as international crime of genocide or crimes against humanity and war crimes. And how do we do this? Because we make assessments as to whether there is a risk of any of these crimes occurring in any situation. And I'm talking about us assessing risk factors for atrocity crimes such as hate speech, stigmatization, ethnic profiling, human rights violations and abuses. And because we know that atrocity crimes like genocide do not happen overnight, they require planning, there are processes, they have root causes, they have triggers, and that there needs to be a conducive environment to their occurrence, then we look at all those factors and then advise accordingly. So really, it is not within our mandate to determine whether a genocide is happening or not. So when a member state accuses another member state of genocide, then what we do is even before it happens, because we have an ongoing everyday situation analysis of countries. So we look at those situations of analysis, and then we make that determination. So we treat, for example, the determination of one member state on another on genocide. We treat all member states equally, and at the same time, we rely on our ways of analyzing, our framework of analysis for atrocity prevention, for example, to get us to that point. So, and if we do then determine that it is at that point, then we advise the Secretary General, who in turn advises the General Assembly or the Security Council. But at this particular point, there's no single process that will not go through the exact what I've just described, the steps that I've just described, that we have to analyze each single issue depending on quite a number of risk factors.
And that's a very interesting insight to your work. And I wonder if you could elaborate, even possibly drawing on examples beyond human rights situation in Xinjiang, of how the broader geopolitical confrontation between China and the US influences your ability to do your work and to respond to crisis situations as they emerge.
You know, the geopolitical confrontation between China and the US, we see it not unlike any other political disagreement in other countries, because we need to work within the confines of the world as it is. When we think about the 193 member states of the UN, there are so many geopolitical confrontations happening at so many levels. Some of them actually result in actual violence. You saw what happened, for example, in Karabakh. Many conflicts that we see right now, we've seen Ethiopia and the accusations of Eritrean troops being on the ground. Like, there are so many of these kind of geopolitical confrontations going on. So we prefer to see what happens between China and the US, just like any other political disagreement that happens.
So just you don't feel that this kind of gridlock in the Security Council in any kind of significant way hinders your ability to operate in cases such as Myanmar or certain others?
In Myanmar is a situation that right now has we issued a statement with it on Myanmar. Sorry, just 2 weeks ago, together with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet. And even as we issued the statement, we issued it with the knowledge that in Myanmar that there are quite a number of processes that are going on there. And we have the ICJ, because you remember in 2019, Gambia proceeded against Myanmar in the International Court of Justice, and they alleged that Myanmar had failed its obligation under the Convention to prevent genocide, and they requested for provisional measures. And then we also have the ICC. We know that in 2019 that the pre-trial chamber authorized a formal investigation by the prosecutor into the situation of the Rohingya. And we know that the prosecutor had requested an investigation into the crime of deportation as a crime against humanity. The decision of the trial chamber is very important because it gave the prosecutor a very broad scope that may allow her to investigate other crimes, including genocide, as long as the crime was committed, at least in part, on the territory of Bangladesh, where most of the Rohingya now are as refugees, or the territory of another state party, because Myanmar is not a state party to the Rome Statute. And then we have the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar that is headed by Nicholas Koumjian. And they are collecting evidence of the most serious international crimes and violations of international law, and they are preparing files for criminal prosecution. So I'm saying all this about Myanmar, not to underplay the role of a united Security Council, but to say that for Myanmar, for example, there are quite a number of other mechanisms that are involved and that are working. But at the same time, our statement with Michelle Bachelet, we asked the Security Council to follow up on the meeting that it had previously had on Myanmar. And really, we would really want action taken, because when you imagine the situation of what's going on in Myanmar, there's been a coup, and beyond the coup, we have the already dire situation of the Rohingya that was there to begin with. You can imagine what it feels like for them to be under the Tatmadaw right now. So I say all this to say that we work, we try as many entry points as possible. Our office tries as many entry points as possible. We partner with UN agencies like the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We support the work that's going on through in any kind of way, in research, in anything. But at the same time, of course, we really, really do need Security Council that stands together on situations like Myanmar. And it's often the case that people sometimes forget how united the Security Council was when our office was created. The Office of the Prevention of Genocide and the Office of the Responsibility to Protect, that the world had just come through Rwanda and Srebrenica. And again, the world was saying never again. Just like the world had said never again after the Holocaust, now the world was saying never again. So we do need that Security Council, the Security Council that's stands together for those kind of situations.
Thank you. And the next question again touches directly on this issue of the Security Council and the kind of the promises of never again, which you reference. And you'll not be unaware that much of the world is quite shocked by the events that are occurring in Xinjiang, which have been designated as genocide by the US and other states. But given the world as it is and the intractability in the Security Council, I wonder, is there anything that can be done to halt what has been referred to as the ongoing genocide of the Uyghur people?
Part of the mandate of my office is to collect information on issues of violations of human rights, international humanitarian law. And we are specifically asked to do so on the basis of ethnic and racial origin. And we look at it from the perspective that if those situations are not prevented, they might lead to genocide. So, as I said earlier we bring attention to potential situations that could result in genocide. We have a document in the office called the Framework of Analysis for the Prevention of Atrocity, through which we assess certain countries or certain situations in terms of whether they qualify, whether they fit the risk factors that could show that a country is sliding towards genocide. So I would say that for this particular situation, as well as other situations in the world, that the process is the same, that we have to verify, and then as soon as we verify, then we advise the Secretary General. So there's no situation in the world that is above our verification. We are verifying every single complaint we receive. So we verify it, and then we look at it from the perspective of whether it qualifies or not. So I would say that we've received complaints on this particular situation, and just like other situations we've received complaints on, and of course there's a whole process of verification that is happening.
Thank you. And now, referring to your background in African peacemaking, I would like to ask you specifically about another crisis, the ongoing crisis in the Great Lakes region, where it seems that geopolitical competition and resource extraction continue to generate immense suffering for civilian populations there, especially in the eastern DRC. And as neighbouring governments continue to encroach upon the DRC, do you feel that the peace, security, and cooperation framework is still sufficient?
From my mandate, my major concern in the Great Lakes region is ethnic violence, ethnic divisions, the root causes. You know, what sustains these ethnic divisions? How do we break the supply and demand chain of weapons, which is a very efficient chain? And knowing that, again, that atrocity crimes that are happening there, particularly in the DRC, do not happen overnight. And that we know that there are all these processes with with the root causes and triggers I described earlier, and the very conducive environment for happening. That is what worries us a lot in the office, and we worry about the ethnically motivated attacks and the ethnic profiling of citizens in terms of constituting that very dangerous trajectory that heightens the risk of genocide. And we know also that member states of the UN, including those in the Great Lakes, that they have unanimously pledged to protect populations from these crimes. Now, in the Great Lakes, they have a protocol on specifically on the prevention of genocide, and it's the only part of the world where specific committees have been created by member states on the prevention of genocide. So we know that the protection of populations is really the primary responsibility of states. But through those genocide committees, we keep pointing out to the member states that the international community has a responsibility to assist them in protecting populations where necessary. So in terms of the Great Lakes region, we know is always teetering on the verge of atrocities. We've seen one of the worst atrocities happen there, the genocide in Rwanda. However, I feel that an independent and impartial investigation into those allegations on neighboring governments and ensuring of accountability for serious violations would then be required, but that would not be within the mandate of our office.
Thank you. So, within the mandate of your office, it seems like your primary focus in the region, correct me if I'm wrong, is diffusing this kind of some of these ethnic tensions and trying to work to build bridges between communities who have been in conflict. Is that a kind of a correct
Yes,
understanding?
yes, that is correct.
And how do you see the specific challenges of this approach in the region? Is there anything in the Great Lakes which is particularly challenging from this aspect?
Yes, of course, the Great Lakes, home to so many resources, and the resources, of course, bringing their dynamics of issues. We have, I think it's the one of the regions with the highest number of peace agreements and highest number of peace agreements that have fallen apart as well. And it's also a region where there is a lot of interest from quite a number of other countries. You remember at some point um, uh, the wars kept overlapping into each other. We would find the militaries of so many other countries in the, for example, in the DRC. So the environment that creates a very conducive environment for the kind of work that we do in terms of preventing genocide. But some of the governments in the region have little control over some of the areas, and then it brings us into that space where you have militias then have so much power, because when you're then preventing atrocities, then you're working with militias, which is in essence what we should be doing, because you in peace building, what I've learned is that it's important to work with the people with power to create war, because in essence they also have the power to create peace. So there are quite a number of dynamics in that particular space of the Great Lakes region that contribute to the Great Lakes region always being part of the priority countries that need addressing in terms of prevention of atrocity.
Thank you. And one final question. Unfortunately, any conversation on your tenure is going to raise issues which cause people a lot of distress and despondence. But I just like to ask you where you see particular cause for hope at this moment in the world.
There's quite a bit, and your question is related to a question I often ask myself when I think about hope. And that question is, how do we quantify what we prevent? Because we prevent quite a bit, but then we can't quantify it, we can't qualify it, we can't explain it, we can't prove it. And there is a lot of hope in terms of the strength of will of young people and, and community leaders who have managed to achieve change within their communities. We have quite a number of local peace champions. We have a lot of ownership of processes that are participatory, that involve people. I see a lot of hope in women's inclusion in peace building. It never was the case that women would be included in peace building. It was often always the situation that peacemaking was seen as men's business, and making war was seen as men's business. And we never went into the details of whether women are involved in peacemaking, in war making. But that has completely changed. You've seen the landscape change. There is more ownership of peace processes. There is also more ownership of issues. If you look at the young people in Myanmar right now, standing up and saying, this is our country, and things need to happen differently. They have carved a very powerful niche for themselves in Myanmar. This is something that hasn't been seen before. There's also stronger accountability for those in positions of power to achieve change. There are quite a number of spaces in which we can find accountability, we can find space for accountability. And this is happening. And right now, I'm involved in a program where we are trying to work with the learning institutions worldwide to theorize prevention of genocide, because people see genocide as this really huge word, frightening word that's often not unpacked, or they see it as something that happened in Rwanda, or they see it as something that happened in the past, like a historical event. And right now, we are doing a lot of work in terms of unpacking this. And we know at the end of the day that when you're speaking about hope, that we can't measure the success of hope in trying one's best, but we measure it in terms of achieving the expected result, which is averting the feared tragedy. And at the end of the day, then we come back to how do we quantify what we prevent. And I would just like to say to anyone listening to this that prevention of genocide is not impossible, and that with clear and early warnings, which are usually there because genocides are planned, uh, and with those kind of clear and early warnings, if we, based on rigorous and tested methodology, if we take decisive action, and if we commit to deal with the immediate and root causes, that we can actually prevent genocide. And that's really the space for hope that we need to keep widening this circle of people who are working on the prevention of genocide, so that the more people we get into that circle, the better it is in terms of prevention of genocide and related atrocity crimes.
Thank you. And I wish you all the best of luck for this very, very important task which is ahead of you. And I look forward to seeing the positive results of your work.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate this opportunity that you invited me to speak. And I would ask that the Cambridge community thinks quite a lot in terms of theorizing and philosophizing the concept of the prevention of genocide from as many aspects as possible, from a legal aspect, from an environmental aspect, from a medical perspective, from psychology perspective, from any kind of perspective that we can think of, including theology, so that ultimately we get as many champions as possible throughout the world who can give as many interpretations as possible on the prevention of genocide. It's an area that is not as researched as it should be. It's researched more by historians more than people who are dealing with the present day issues. If you, for example, think about what are the implications of the prevention of genocide in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, then you see a whole world that needs to be thought of, that needs to be discussed, and that needs to then therefore lead us to the saying never again, that we shall not have another genocide again.
I fully agree, and I very much hope that the Cambridge community will take up your challenge. And Special Advisor Nderitu, it's been a pleasure and an honour speaking with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, and I really, really appreciate, Tom, that I got this opportunity.
Thanks for listening to this podcast on genocide and mass atrocity prevention and the responsibility to protect. You can find the Centre for Geopolitics on Twitter at CamGeopolitics. All of our events are advertised on our website at cfg.polis.cam.ac.uk.